Doug's not here, but I think we're going to start the meeting because we have a couple comments. So we're ready to go. Okay, good morning and welcome to the Nampa City Council meeting. This is a special council workshop today. And as we get started, we're going to have our new councilwoman, Natalie, open us in the prayer and pledge.
Our Father in heaven, we are so grateful for the opportunity that we have to meet together as city officials and to discuss the needs that we have here in our community and to be able to discuss the funds that have been given and for the opportunity to be able to distribute those that best fit our community and the people that we serve. And we are so grateful for the opportunity that we have to be in these positions, to be leaders and to be pillars in our community that we can make decisions that are best suited for our community as we grow and as we develop. And we ask thee to guide us through this process, that we will be inspired and be able to know what thou would want us to do. And we are so grateful for everyone here and for everyone that serves in our community. And we ask thee these things in the name of thy Son, Jesus Christ. Amen. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Natalie.
Yeah.
Roll call.
Perfect. Didn't work yesterday.
Bauer? Here. Haverfield?
Here.
Levi? Pangula?
Here.
Bruner? Here. And Rodriguez?
Here.
As we get started this morning, just a couple comments as we begin. First of all, thank you, staff, for being here so early, and thank you for all the work that's gone into putting these presentations together. We have a lot for City Council. We have a lot to accomplish in 2 hours. It's going to be a very fast-paced morning. We're going to begin with ARPA funding. We're going to keep this discussion to 1 hour, maybe short 5 minutes, we'll see. That's going to be really tough to do. So what I'm going to suggest for council members, we're going to hold questions. I was going to grab you guys a notepad and I didn't. Does anybody need something to write on or a pen? If you're good, hopefully there's a pen in your drawer. If you need something, holler and we'll go get it for you. So what I'm going to suggest is that you take notes during the meeting, during the presentation of your questions, and we're going to go through. We're going to start, well, and I'll let Doug Racine talk us through that, but we're going to just move quickly. So staff presentations, and then we're going to reserve 30 minutes for conversation. So hopefully that works. So save questions to the end, and then the second half of our meeting today, you see it there on your agenda, so I'm not going to waste any time going over it. I think that's all I'm going to say to get started. Doug, I'll let you just kick in, and we'll have Chris get going, and we'll be ready to go. And like I said, we're going to have max of 30 minutes max for these first 3 presentations, the ARPA, and then we'll have 30 minutes to talk. We should be on. I think
now it should be. There we go. Let's start off. I'm going to bring up a summary that.
Were we going to start with Chris doing?
Yeah, I'm going to bring Chris right into that summary. That's what I'm going to bring right here. So we'll introduce. This is Chris Boaz. He is relatively new to the city. He is our grants administrator and grants writer. I'm going to bring him up to give a description of what ARPA allowances are, and then I will follow up with a file for proposed ARPA spending.
You know, I realized that we didn't probably even define ARPA, so would you like to explain what ARPA is?
ARPA is, well, first of all, good morning, Mayor and Council. ARPA is known as the American Rescue Plan Act. It's just money that's allocated by the federal government that's flowing down to the states, counties, and cities. And like Doug said, we're taking a lot of information and making this into a very brief presentation. Is the final rule was 430 pages. Then they came out with a summary that was 40 pages, and now we've summarized into about 5 pages. So we're going to go through just what is allowable through ARPA. There are 6 main categories. First is public health response. Second is addressing negative economic impact. Third is premium pay for essential workers. Fourth is water and sewer infrastructure. Fifth is broadband. And sixth is everybody's favorite, which is replacing public sector revenue loss. So in the first section of supporting public health categories are vaccination and testing programs, paid family and medical leave for employees, and emergency medical response expenses. In addressing negative economic impacts, so that's your households, your businesses, food assistance for food and food banks, emergency housing assistance. For small businesses, any loans or grants to mitigate financial hardship, whether that's costs to retain employees, mortgage and rent, and utility assistance. For impacted industries, there are 3 that are automatically qualified. That's travel, tourism, and hospitality. Although any industry can be defined as impacted if it saw greater than 8% of employment loss from pre-pandemic levels. Under restoring public sector capacity, there's payroll and covered benefits for public safety, public health, and healthcare, human services, and similar employees of a recipient government. Under that, as well as providing worker retention incentives, including reasonable increases in compensation. Our third category is premium pay for essential workers. Cities may use recovery funds to provide premium pay up to $13 an hour to eligible workers performing essential work, either in the public sector roles or through grants to third-party employers. These payments can be paid in installments or in lump sums. Fourth category is water and sewer infrastructure. There is some gray area still in this, especially under that first one of culvert repair. We've reached out to the National Association of Counties, and we're trying to get a little bit more of a straight answer with regard to that culvert repair and irrigation water. Under the infrastructure, we also have to improve access to safe drinking water, water quality testing, compliance monitoring, and Fifth category is broadband infrastructure. The final rule allows for cities and counties to invest in locations without reliable internet. That's 100 megabytes per second download and 20 megabytes per second upload. And finally, the last category is replacing public sector revenue loss. Cities can use lost revenue for general government services up to the revenue loss amount, whether that's the standard allowance, which is $10 million, or the amount calculated using the Treasury formula. Common examples include, but are not limited to, construction of schools and hospitals, road building and maintenance, other infrastructure, health services, general government administration, environmental remediation, and first responders. This revenue loss portion can also be used for matching fund costs, cost share requirements for other grants. However, the non-revenue loss portion, our $7.5 million, cannot be. The ineligible expenses for ARPA are any large deposits into any pension funds, funding debt services, legal settlements or judgments, and any rainy day funds.
Thank you, Chris. Chris, you did that really fast, and that was hard to do so fast, and there is a lot that goes into that. So to drill that down that quickly, thank you. You've done a really good job trying to narrow it down. So thank you.
Just
I'm sorry.
sometimes
Thank
slow
you.
is fast. Give me just 1 second to bring this up on the screen. It never goes as smoothly as you want when you're looking for the one specific file here. Pardon me, Mayor.
That's fine. Mark, we're on Teams, correct?
Yes.
And Tom is going to join via Teams for his portion, is that correct? He is on? Okay, good.
Yeah, I'm on, Mayor.
Good morning, Tom.
Good morning.
Thank you for joining us this morning.
You're welcome.
I do not know why. Well, give me 1 second. If I can't get it, we'll just go with the presentations in front of you, but the file I want is not easy to find here for some reason. There we go. Got it. So let me add just a little more to what Chris has said in terms of timing. We have received, if you look at the screen or your handout, we've received the first tranche of funds, $8.756 million. We put it in an interest-bearing account, so we've accumulated about $5,800 of interest. We will receive the second tranche later this year in May or June, giving us $17.5 million aggregate monies to spend. We have until December 31st, 2024 to obligate the funds and December 1st, 2026 to spend the funds. So we've got a little bit of time, but that time will go quickly. So as we've looked at the various requests, and there have been many, and there are many that we would like to fund that we probably can't, but it's amazing how fast $17 million can go faced with the needs that the city has. So in the very second top section, in the light green and yellow, I've aggregated the totals into two groups, government and community investment, which is right now set at $2.8 million of spend, and then public works, which is $14.7 million. So the vast preponderance is going to go to the public works projects that for years we have struggled to keep up with the pace and the needs. Now, as we go down, let's look at some of the specifics here. Under general government, we have 3 or 4 small items that we're adding in here to help us deal with managing the process. Finance admin. I'm spending a fair amount of time dedicating my resources to ARPA to give you the information and to manage the process, and need a little bit of help with that. So some admin costs for my team. Emergency planning support. This is really critical. If you recall early on in the ARPA, or not ARPA, but way back the first COVID tranche with CARES money, Chief Carpenter was our emergency manager. He had to step away from his job to fulfill that emergency manager role. So we then received a DOJ grant to fund a position from the DOJ grant. That DOJ money is running out. And so to continue the planning support, we propose emergency planning support of a total of $150,000 over 3 years to help us shore up and complete our emergency planning support and preparation. One of the big things that's going to happen because of this money, and not just this money, but the infrastructure money coming from the state, from the feds, is we will need more grants writing support. There are grants out there coming from the federal government and from the state, which total in the billions of dollars that we will be eligible to apply for, but we need a body to help us do that work. So we're proposing funding here over 2 years to help support that. This item here, the IT Zero Trust, in the world where I live, and many of us do with the reality that our systems are good but vulnerable, the thought of having the city's system hijacked and locked down and sold back to us for ransom scares me. I've seen it happen very close to happening in St. Luke's when I worked there. We are subject to daily fraud activity with Wells Fargo, and I can really see it possible. All it takes is one person clicking on the wrong button in the city to give somebody, an external bad actor, access to our system. And from there on, it's downhill, and the cost could be significant. So what we're proposing is IT is researching with Butch Shireman a zero trust environment that would cost around $350 to implement and help make our systems a little more secure than they are today. Finally, the Family Justice Center. The Family Justice Center has a series of grants that has been funding them. One of those grants was eliminated, and they won't be able to apply for it and get it back until 2025. This is a temporary fix for them to help them keep their doors open and running. I think many of you know the critical work that the Family Justice Center does, and they do it on a very tight budget. Streets and Police, ICC, this is in combination with the projects that Jeff Barnes has proposed to you with the intelligent traffic design. And this one takes it a step further to combine this with the needs of the police to help them create more effective response and monitoring capacities. This isn't all, they wanted more money. We would like to have been able to give them more money, but this helps them get along the way and matches the funds we had from Amazon, the 1.5 and another $1 million, to give them a good start on that process, both the traffic and the police review. And let's get down to fire. We know the fire is no longer part of the city, but they've been impacted by COVID, probably, and along with police, as heavy as anybody. They have the need for training facility tech. In, I think, in 1 month alone, they incurred $92,000 worth of COVID-related overtime that was above the normal overtime. They have incurred over $200,000 worth of health-related costs because they're first responders and they're in the front line of receiving everybody's germs. So they tend to catch it and they get impacted by it. So we propose $360,000 to go to the fire department. And then the two biggest chunks here will be for Tom to speak to. Well, we've got about $10 million of public works money and $3 million reserved for matching funds. We do not know exactly what grants requirements will be. We want to make sure we have enough money out of the $10 million of revenue replacement money that we have to enable us to chase those grants and be able to provide matching funds if required. Under the $10 million revenue replacement portion, we can do that. So we want to separate a portion of this money to make it available for us to leverage it into greater funding. And finally, the other funding options. Through the last pay period, the city has incurred $344,000 worth of COVID sick time. That means the people that have called in sick with COVID or COVID-related accepted illness has cost the city $344,000. We're not going to cover all that. We're going to absorb some of it and just deal with it as we need to, but we're proposing $300,000 of the monies to go to cover those costs year to date. That means anything from here on out, we have to take care of ourselves within city budgets, non-ARPA funded. This is a planning and zoning highway development. This is related to Highway 16, but it's a project that planning and zoning needs to help support that process, $115,000 if we need to. And Doug Critchfield knows more about that than I do. And then utility billing cares and shares. We have a program that allows individuals once every 2 years to apply to the city to receive $150 in utility bill assistance. They can do that once every 2 years. We have around 90,000 left, and that will go quickly. So we're dealing with utility billings, rate increases. We're dealing with some degree of economic uncertainty. So we want to shore up that fund to make sure that we have citizens who need to get access to this, have the capacity. So we're proposing adding the $400,000 of funding into the utility billing cares and shares over the next 2-3 years. And finally, one issue here we want to bring forward is the forced lids. Prior to my arriving, in fact, prior to most of us being here, there was a short-lived practice of pushing out lids, local improvement districts that were not entirely voluntary. The city at that time saw a need, deemed it appropriate to do the improvements, and then charge the homeowners kind of regardless of their capacity or willingness to want to participate in this program. There were two lids, 162 and 164. Each lid had about 100 participants each. One lid was for $335,000. The second was for $229,000, I believe, right around there. So a total of $624,000 in lids. We're at a point now within the city that we need to take care of the funding for these. We have two options primarily. One, you as a council could decide to force this out and bill the residents for each of these lids, which would be $4,000 per resident in each group. Or we can find and leverage the ARPA funds to pay for that lid and not make the residents pay for something which they may not have asked for. The challenge for me and financially is that we have borne this cost. It has been taken out of city funds, and it needs to be replenished one way or the other. I cannot leave it sitting as it is. I'm required to make a movement here to fix this and to fund it one way or the other. The proposal here is to take these portion of these ARPA funds and relieve the citizens of this pressure and just refund the city for costs we've incurred in generating the improvement in those districts. That was a bit of a long explanation, but
I would like to add that this is on the council agenda for next Tuesday evening as an agenda item, whether to go out to public, to authorize a public hearing and go out, identify, well, to bill the citizens or to find other funding. So there will be an opportunity to discuss this on Tuesday evening.
okay.
The P&Z Highway 16 development, that's on the agenda as well, is it not? The costs associated with that?
I think it was. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
I've got to look back at the agenda. I think we
Doug, do you know if the $116,000 was on Mondays? Or Rodney?
you remember? We'll look real quick, Randy.
Yes.
Yeah. I think, we all looked at it.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
So I recognize that I have thrown about 30 numbers at you in rapid fire succession here. Are there any, well, according to the mayor's definition, we can take questions as she's requested, but that's in essence the ARPA funding. Tom can speak more specifically to his portion, but his values and mine are relatively aligned right now. With that, I will.
Thank you so much. So what we'll do is we'll step over to Tom, and then we're going to come back. We can put either of the presentations up, but you've got Doug's presentation in front of you. So then we'll talk afterwards. So Tom, thank you.
Okay. Morning, Mayor, Council. Sorry I can't be there in person. I'm in quarantine, so you probably don't want me there anyway, but I'm glad to be able to talk to you about this regardless. Let me see if I can make this full screen for you so you can see it better. There we go. Okay. So this is the ARPA funds that we're recommending from Public Works. And I'm going to talk a little bit about our customer service, how we came up with our projects, some of the ARPA criteria, what we're proposing. And then I know this is mostly about ARPA, but I know a little bit about Infrastructure Job Act and what that means and how these two relate. And then how we can use some of these fundings to some of these grant matches that we see coming. So here's, things we do for our customers, safe infrastructure, drinking water, failure is not an option. So these are all considerations when we're putting together our list of projects. Some of our biggest challenges are the aging infrastructure, just finding the funding to cover all that and the line replacements, and then responding to the development that we're seeing. So when we went through the list, we wanted to make sure that all our projects met our guidelines. And then we also had some sort of COVID relief in our program. And, you know, the way we could do that is fully fund at least a year or two of pipe replacement, which would relieve the need for utility rate increases. And then we also know about what's in the program. We can't use any of these projects for expansion. They have to be maintenance related. So non-growth related projects for ARPA. So we know there was $17 million in the city, and Doug went through all the needs in the city outside of Public Works. You know, we easily came up with a list over the 17 million. So we started going through and making priorities on our list. And again, one of the things we were focusing on is water line replacements. We know that 24% of our domestic lines, or the 549 miles, will have reached their life in 2040. So that's kind of the basis for the 5 miles a year of pipe replacement. We've done the math, and that's what we should be doing to keep on top of that. Those 24% pipes that are near their life. Right now we're 1 mile per year. So to get to a 5 mile per year water line replacement, that's a pretty large jump in rates. But these ARPA funds could, like I said, help not ask for a large rate increase, at least for a year or two, to get and still meet our goals on the water line replacement. Daniel will be working on exactly what the project's locations are, but we will consider places like downtown. You know, there's a number of older pipes down there. We can also do surface restoration on the sidewalks and streetscapes on top of some of these lines, which will also be help to downtown. So running Doug's math on the 67% of the funding from ARPA would go to Public Works in this current proposal, 33% for community support and grant match. So, but here's the math. So we've got, Doug mentioned there's 2 tranches of money, one in 22 and 23. So yeah, 5.85 million in 22 and same with 23. And then 2.9 million for the COVID relief and grant match. So this grant match includes that 3 million that Doug mentioned to hold off for the future grants we see coming. So for 22, we recommended to put 1.5 million towards the elevated water tank replacement. The total cost of that is over 7 million. So we can build that with a combination of ARPA funds that we've been collecting in our fund balance, and then the proposed impact fee. So also that we're able to get some funding towards a water tank that relieves some pressure on rates as well. Design 1 mile of water line projects that have things shovel ready. That'll be important in getting ready for some of these grants that we see coming and in the Infrastructure Job Act and the next wave of ARPA. And then we're suggesting to put 2 million towards our wastewater treatment plant, Group F. So this is a project that's already funded today, but we can fund some of that with ARPA, which will free up some of the enterprise funds that we have to take on another very important project that I'll get to at the end of this presentation. And then the 1.3 for the intelligent transportation and police crime detection. And then for 23, a little bit more funds to finish off the water tank, another 5 million towards the Group F project. So we just talked about the known dollars, the 17.5 million that we know is coming. There's also a phase 2 of ARPA, and there's more dollars coming through are state agencies, and those definitions of exactly what they will be used for are still being defined as the legislative session is in right now. So I attended a environmental subcommittee Senate meeting at the State House with the DEQ presented some of their programs a couple of weeks ago, and that's how we got some of this information. So we know there's 1.8 billion total in ARPA for the state. The phase 2 portion is going to be another 250 million for natural resources and water storage, and 300 million for drinking and wastewater projects. So there's 2 separate state agencies that will oversee this funding. One is Department of Water Resources and the other is DEQ. For the water resource and storage, we've heard that they want to fund the Anderson Ranch, dam raise, Mountain Home water treatment. There will be some funding left at the end for cities and counties to compete for. And our reuse project at the plant might be a good fit for that. And then on the DEQ side, they've collected 1.4 billion in requests from cities across the state on needs. So they're working through their process right now. One of the issues is these projects need to be shovel ready and they have to be constructed by 2026. So unless it's a very simple, like water line replacement, for example, some of these more complex wastewater projects, they take 4 years to get through the permitting, water rights, and design and construction. So that's a very tight time frame for the state and some of these cities if they haven't already started. We're in a good spot here because we've got our Group F project is it's ready to go. It's shovel ready, and we can suggest some of the funding go towards that if others are not able to deliver. Also, we can we want to make sure that the small cities in the state, we help them out because I know they have a hard time with funding some of these things. What we're suggesting, we're going to write a letter to DEQ and suggest that the small cities don't have any match, and some of those larger cities we could put in some match to help spread the dollars out. So there's definitely more opportunity for additional funding that we're working on with the ARPA funds. So specific projects we're thinking about are funding that 5 miles of water line replacements that we were just designed, that 7 million. That'd get us near that 5 miles of replacement. And then, up to at the plant, we've got 61 million of the 220 of the Group F is reuse. So that's a good project to submit. And again, it is ready to go. We can suggest using a combination of our SRF loan, some city matching from us, and then some grant match from the state. And so, both of these, the reuse project fits the criteria of both the IDWR and the DEQ. So again, these are being developed right now, and it's good that we're getting things shovel ready so we can be ready when it comes time that somebody doesn't deliver on the funds. Okay, so one of the needs that we're seeing immediately is a gravity sewer to State Highway 16. So I mentioned earlier that the ARPA funds are not eligible to fund this work because it's growth related. Although it's a need, and we need to figure out and discuss how we're going to handle that, because we'd always planned to have sewer going out along the U-Stick corridor towards the State Highway 16. But the good news and bad news is it's coming a lot faster than we thought. We didn't think it'd be funded and constructed in roughly 2 years. So what that means is we really should have something out there by the time 16 opens, or we're in a situation where you may get Ada County developers asking for Meridian to serve properties in Canyon County. And that's not a situation that we'd want to put ourselves in. So we have 4 miles left to go, and the cost of that is high, 25 to 40 million, and it's because it's a deep sewer. So what we're suggesting is, we noticed that some of the ARPA dollars we're putting towards the existing plant that's already funded, which would free up dollars in our enterprise fund to go to the State Highway 16 project. So, excuse me. So at doing the math, it came up with 2 million in 21, 22, 5 million. And then, depending on what we can get out of the legislator in their wave 2, potentially up to 21 million. That could get us what we need to fund this. We do need to start design and start working on it if we want to try to make our 2-year deadline. So that's one request that I have is we consider authorizing us at least to start design on this portion of the pipeline to 16. Another thing to consider, we could, if we come up with 25 or 40 million dollars to fund this trunk line, we could be our own utility reimbursement, and then so basically we're fronting the funds, and developers can pay back as they hook up. That we generally go over a 20-year period to do that, so it'll take some time to recoup it, but that is an option if the council has an interest in that. Shifting gears quickly, so that was ARPA, and now we have the Infrastructure Job Act. So that's a whole separate act, and that's $1 trillion worth of projects coming in across the nation. Most of it's in transportation. There are still some water smart grants, recycled water grants, and utility grants in here as well. This is all these rules are still becoming more clear, and Chris and us are all working as a team to try to understand what this means so we're ready. But what we can see is a lot of these grants we need to be applying for in the next 2 quarters of this fiscal year. And so it's exciting times, but there's also there's a lot of work to do on these grants. Another thing to know is that there's also going to be, at least during this 5-year period, a 30% increase in local federal allocation to highway agencies. So that's on the state and local side. So Idaho's doing well, and so and that's a good thing. Other parts of the country aren't doing quite as well economically as we are. So they're just receiving ARPA and Infrastructure Job Act. Well, the governor has decided that in the budget to put some funding towards transportation. So so far that's been held up on everything I've seen so far and watching the legislators and their work this year. So that they're going to add $200 million ongoing money into the state and local transportation dollars. So 80 million of that would go to locals and 120 million to the state. And also there's going to be dedicated funding to bridges. So what does this all mean for grant match? I think, with the governor's funds coming in, that sets us up well, be able to have grant match for these Infrastructure Job Act projects. So, for example, we think that with this, the governor's allocation, it'll be about $4 million a year. So if we were to put all of that, $4 million, at a 20% grant match, which is probably conservative, most of the time it's 7%, that'd get $20 million of grants a year, or $100 million in potential grants over 5 years. So that's setting aside these dollars is important to be able to compete for the projects and have the match to cover it. And then, as Doug mentioned, there's another $3 million of the 17.5 that we could put in for the water and wastewater projects. So again, at 20%, that gives us $15 million in grant potential. So that was it for my presentation. Answer any questions?
So before we go into questions, Tom, first of all, thank you. Well, I definitely hear feedback coming from somewhere. You know, just a couple things for council real quickly. This is like drinking from literally a fire hose. It's so much information. I believe this was included in your packet. Hopefully you had a chance to review it. But you know what? One thing I would say, I wouldn't expect council to fully understand the depths of this because it's so much. Just in the last weeks, we've gotten further clarification on these funds and how to apply the funds. So, you know what? One thing I have to say is that Tom and Jeff and Chris and Doug have spent hours, and other staff members too. I won't mention them all, but trying to understand and come forward with a recommendation of how best they think we should use these funds. So the purpose of today is, one, to provide you information on some recommendations of what they're thinking might be the highest and best utilization of the funds. I do want to say that we've had a couple of priorities, and one is to relieve pressure on ratepayers and also to maximize the dollars. That's why you see funds set aside for grants, so that if we can leverage $3 million to get, whatever, that's exactly what we need to do. So, and then lastly, I want to mention that we will be having a budget amendment coming up, and this will be part of the budget amendment, and there will be a public hearing. So the final decision will be made actually at that time, but and I don't know what date we've got that on the second council meeting in March. In March, thank you, Doug. So that will be a public hearing, and the public will have opportunity to weigh in during that public hearing, both on the budget amendment and on these ARPA dollars. So as we share that, let's get started. I know that you guys have questions, and I don't know who wants to jump out of the gate first.
I will, Mayor.
Okay.
So the question is this. Doug, so we get a whole total of all these funds coming in and starting up to 2024, 25. Will it be, we would be on top of our budget that we set, or is it going to be included in the budget that we set?
Well, technically both, because the budget we first set will be before ARPA dollars. Then the amendment will include whatever portion of spending for 2022 belongs in this year, and next year's budget for FY23 will include whatever is left over to be spent in FY23. So we have until calendar FY24 to obligate the funds, meaning we budget them, we design them. So it will be budgeted through amendment in FY22 and budgeted as part of the process in FY23.
Okay. Also, now I see that there's money for the fire department.
Yes.
Training facility tech, 60,000 overtime and COVID treatment costs.
Right.
Why are we funding the fire department now?
That's a very good question. I think there's a pretty reasonable answer. The fire department as a district does not have any access to ARPA funds. They do not have an avenue like the cities, municipalities, tribes, and so forth do. There are two options for which they could request use of ARPA funds. That's through the county or through the city. They are probably disproportionately impacted in terms of payroll by COVID. And the county so far has declined, to my knowledge, if I am incorrect, they may correct me, has declined to my knowledge to provide them any degree of support to deal with the COVID impacts that they are facing. So we're looking at it from a perspective of what's the right thing to do to help the fire department. And it's a fairly small amount of money considering what they're going through, but that's the rationale.
So if we approve this amount, will it reduce the burden of the taxpayers, or will it continue as is?
Well, I think I can't say that it would specifically reduce the burden. It would prevent an increase to them. But in my world, this is just my world, when I'm living with numbers, if you have a cost you know you're going to incur and you have a limited amount of revenue, that means you have to cut something else. And so I think what we're facing here is the fire department either gets a little bit of funds to us to help deal with costs they did not anticipate, or they have to look back and say, what do I have to cut?
I see. Okay, thank you.
Okay, next questions.
Quick question. Do you know if the county is accepting ARPA funds?
I believe they are. Well, as with us, they got the money. We didn't necessarily request it. They sent us the cash.
So there
They
will,
sent them the cash too.
and there is a meeting planned as far as jointly with with the fire department, with maybe some representatives from the city to see if they might be able to do what they're asking us to do to shift maybe some funds available to the fire department into our ARPA funds.
I think that would, it definitely could not hurt to go as a unified front to request some from them. They received 40 million plus $44 million in funding for the county. That's their piece of the pie.
And I've asked the same question as far as for wastewater treatment, if there's maybe money available from the county that maybe could flow in through them to us as well, if that conversation can happen as well.
It's a worthwhile conversation, but I do not at this time have any idea of how the county plans on allocating their funding. But they're probably in a similar boat to us, kind of waiting till the dust settles. The mayor mentioned that the final rule came out in January. The final rule was a 437-page document with no title page, no table of contents, and no way to research anything. You had to read through each page at a time to figure it out. So it wasn't easy.
I just see us taking the lead maybe as far as in the effort, because they're not going to reach out to us.
No, they won't.
I believe that fire has reached out to the county and they have not received a favorable response. And so my thought is, I think it's important to ensure that they have the funding there. But if the county then comes back, then we could reallocate these dollars if the funding comes from the county. So that would be the hope, and we'll advocate on behalf of fire to the county. And if we can get these expenses covered through the county, is that a fair thing to say? Then we would reallocate the funds and would not need them to cover these purposes. That'd be, okay.
Mayor, just one question. I was a little confused as far as on your presentation, there's other funding options of P&Z Highway 16 development. Is that, and it says P&Z, it's not Public Works.
No, it's not Public Works. It's related to Highway 16, but it is not part of Tom's numbers. It's totally separate. I think Rodney or Doug could speak to the exact use of the money. It has to do with a planning project, I believe, for Highway 16.
And I know it's on our agenda from our council meeting, so we can just discuss it then.
Right.
It's for design to get the project started. And right now, all of the various firms are absolutely buried. So to even get in when we have a deadline to get construction done, you have to have the design phase. And so there happened to be an opening in the availability that someone could take it on. So if we could fund it, we can get going on the design to help us meet the deadline.
So is it for utility extensions then?
Right, and it's not ARPA dollars because they don't do extension, but it's leveraging the dollars.
That's the reason why it's separate.
That's correct.
Okay.
What
I
other
have one.
questions?
Yes.
Go ahead.
So I see on here the fire for their COVID relief. So they have $200,000 of debt, if you will. And so you're saying that the city, it says that it has 300,000 or it has more and we're just absorbing it?
Right. We're partially correct on the $300,000. To date, through the last payroll, we have incurred $344,000 worth of COVID-related sick time. If I give myself $300,000, that means I'm short $44,000, and any additional COVID sick time is just going to come out of our ongoing funding process, and we'll just deal with it and adapt. We'll cut something else, or we'll make it fit.
So the $200,000 for the fire, that is their total cost?
No, that's probably much less than their total cost. The $360,000, like I said, the overtime alone for 1 month was $92,000. The COVID-related overtime for 1 month was $92,000. This is not covering their entire cost. This is kind of putting a Band-Aid on what they're going through.
Okay, so you're asking city to absorb some, but you're also asking fire to absorb some?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Well, and the city dollars are actual city employees, not fire.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. What other questions do we have?
Mayor, I have just two clarifications on two expenditures. So Chief Carpenter was doing our emergency planning support, and so when that 150,000, are we hiring another person for that then, or what's the plan?
Well, we had, I think, and I'm not sure when it expires, we received last year a 2-year DOJ grant to fund an emergency manager position. That funding was used to support two different people. Currently, it's Ed Hewitt, who's a former policeman who supports the city in developing our entire plan. That funding is running out. So this will fund a position.
So it is a new position, I mean, a position to cover this.
If I could speak to it, and actually it's something that I'm requesting. As we're working on our emergency plan, the next piece of our emergency plan that isn't done is the community connection. We need to identify hubs in our community that if we have, let's say, a power outage, I've got to get all the churches together, the schools together, but we don't have enough staff. I don't have anybody that has the bandwidth. So we need just funding, and it may not be, it may be a contract. We just need to figure out how to get it done, but it's really important that we get it done and we get it done right away.
My clarification, is this just a one-time expense, or is this a potential
Well, it's over.
position that would be ongoing?
It
that we
is
would-
not a
That
long-term
we would need to
position.
fund in the future? Okay,
No.
that's what I wasn't.
It's
Right.
dedicated to get this project
So it's kind of like we did with Ed.
Yeah.
We talked this morning. So,
Yes.
you know, this is your job. We hope to get this done. He got a portion
Yes.
of it done. We have remaining portions
A
to
different piece of it.
accomplish.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Yep.
Second question on the 624,000 lids. Okay, is that it? Now, we publicly announced that we have forced folks, past history, maybe even before most of our history, to go ahead and pay for improved sidewalks, et cetera.
We've done the improvements. We have not requested payment from any individuals.
So there's no past history of anyone having to pay their portion?
Well, on voluntary lids, yes. And Daniel can speak to that better than
I
I.
thought I was hearing that we had forced some individuals to pay their portion.
Mayor, Councilman Bruner, the history of the forced LIDs, we have the two that we're talking about today. In my time at the city, there were a couple of others that were associated with Caldwell Boulevard improvements and improvements on 12th Avenue South that were both done in conjunction with state projects. In the end, those two LIDs were not assessed either. In the end, those LIDs were paid for through city funds.
Okay, so that's what I needed clarification on. We do not have any past history of citizens of Napa who were forced to pay portions, whereas now, what we've been doing in the last while and in the future, we are not forcing them to do so. So I thought maybe, I just wanted to make sure that they weren't left out there hanging, that we were not going to reimburse them. And if we have no one to reimburse, then that's, my question is answered.
Yep.
Okay, thanks.
What other questions do we have?
Mayor, just for clarification, so these items are pretty much solid now? We can't change those? Or can we change them?
We can change them.
Oh, I see.
The reason for this workshop is to discuss them. And these are not finalized. There's a couple of items, two that are going to be on the Tuesday night council agenda, the LID that we just talked about, and then the Highway 16 project.
Okay.
Because they need to get done. The final decision will be made at the public hearing is when we will vote, the second council meeting in March,
Okay.
which will be a public hearing around it. However, if there are suggested changes, I would ask that you get with staff and to really understand the rationale behind the recommendation, because they've put countless hours into research and thought in how best to leverage the dollars. But we want to make a wise decision on how. And so today, if you have any recommendations, we'd love to hear them, but you can also get back with us afterwards, because today is a discussion, it's a workshop, it is not a final decision.
Well, okay, good, because I have several questions on some of these issues, on some of these. For example, the fire has a requested a training facility tech. Well, I would rather pay overtime than COVID if we pay anything at all. So
Would we?
That's kind of the kind of questions I ask about.
Well, Kirk, could you answer that question real quickly, what that 60,000 is for the training tech? it would, because I think we all, it'd be good for us all to hear the answer. So
Yeah,
thank you for asking the question.
You're welcome.
I appreciate it.
I just thought that was kind of weird when they were thinking that the fire department is down, but then you're hiring somebody else now. And I thought, wait a minute.
So Mayor and Councilman Rodriguez, the $60,000 you see for training tech is actually the communication system that was at training while we were with the city had a catastrophic failure. So basically the brains of what we have here in this room for us failed. And so currently any communications we're doing, whether it's for COVID, for training, for political meetings, is being done with a laptop and a camera. And for us to improve or go back to what we had is the replacement's a $60,000 replacement to continue with our open
But that's
meetings.
not a person.
It's not a person.
Okay, well, that's,
No.
okay. Yeah, technology.
Yep.
It's different.
Technology that failed, that was there.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's a human being, dude.
You were gonna apply.
I was gonna apply, yeah. You want me in there.
So, Victor, do you have other questions? Because what I love, if we ask the questions here, then we all get to hear the answers. And so that's the beauty of that. So go ahead if you have other questions.
Okay, so I was going to move some numbers around because I think the priority list for those for our community would be the funds being used to help our community or our taxpayers. So the other side of that would be for law enforcement and for the Family Justice Center. So the priority for me would be Family Justice Center. Well, I think, if I can ask you a couple of questions, Jeannie, okay? That kind of helped me out here a little bit, because I think for the most increase that you've had over the last year, with you can't sufficiently handle those cases, what would be a good number?
Well, this is, and I just want to be clear, this is not a budget where we're just budgeting funds. This is a very specific replacement cost. So it's focused on that replacement. But go ahead.
It's 80,601, so.
Right. I'll
Is that
let
number
Jeannie
just-
explain. That is a very specific number because of a specific item.
Okay.
So we have really a good amount of funding right now with a lot of grants that we have, and Jenny can help me speak to this. But so what we're asking for is the VOCA cut that we had. So the Victims of Crime Act, they cut us because that money, we talked about this before, but the money that we're getting from the federal government, we have been for years, they cut that on the federal level. And so that money was depleted. And so that money coming down to the states has been depleted. So what we're asking for is to replenish that piece only, and they have done a VOCA fix. So they're going to be replenishing that fund, but for now, and that won't be done until 2025, but that's the gap, and that's really what we need. We are asking for what we need, and that's really what we need, is just that those few years or couple years that is until that VOCA fix happens. So it will allow us to maintain everybody that we have currently.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Mayor.
Thank you so much for asking.
Thank you. Sandy, do you have any questions that you'd like to bring forward that we could all hear? It's nice to hear the answers because it spawns other questions, right? So you don't have any right now? Randy?
Mayor, I just point out again that we're looking at about $3 million in the ability to have matching funds going forward. So that's allowing this money to compound itself as well. So if we were to allocate everything without having that set up, we wouldn't have the ability to match. So I think that's a good approach by Doug. Just wanted to point that out. I don't know if it was caught by the council.
Thank you.
Other than that, the only thing I was looking at, I was doing the math on the side here myself, because you had tabulated totals for Gen Gov, but not for public safety, public works, or other funding options. So it was a little confusing how you came up with the 17.5.
Everything in green is the Gen Gov, and everything in yellow is the public works.
Okay.
So Public Works is that 14,706, the yellow highlighted, a column at the top if you go up.
Oh,
Actually, those two totals are up there. You've got about the 2.8 is Gov and Community, and that includes the 3 million. No, it doesn't. Public Works includes the 3 million. in reserve for grants.
Probably when I was eating my Egg McMuffin.
That's how it got yellow.
Maybe on your sheet, no.
Are there any other questions before we move on?
I just have one.
Mayor,
Oh, go ahead.
Yes.
I had a question for Doug about the kind of like the IT, the amount for the IT. I think when I was there, I think I wrote down it was like 360,000. Hopefully that's a correct number that I was thinking of for kind of like protection of any. I don't know if that's like a firewall or is that people were hiring to protect against cyber attacks he was talking about.
Well, that's the IT zero trust structure of 350,000. Yes, question.
Yeah, so is that hiring employees or is that just like, buying a better system or?
That's system development, not staffing.
Doug, if I could, yeah, we're talking software and hardware firewalls. Just to give you guys a quick synopsis, let me make this real quick, but hopefully this will simplify it. The idea of zero trust goes against the traditional way of doing internet setup that has historically been done worldwide. So in the past, when you log into the internet system through your user ID and password, think of it as an M&M. You've gone through the hard outer shell. Once you go through the hard outer shell, you have access to all the chocolate inside. That's the traditional way. The firewall would be the candy coating on the outside. The new way is just because you've gone through that outer shell, we don't trust you anymore. That's where zero trust comes from. You don't get just universal trust. Inside now, you have smaller M&Ms, if you will, in that chocolate area. And you have to validate to get into those individual pieces. So what that does is, if you are invalidated, or if someone breaches you and gets your ID, they can only get into what you have access to, not everything else within your internet area. So what happens is you mitigate significantly the damage that a ransomware can do. They can only get into those smaller pieces instead of the whole thing if we had the traditional. So we have to go through now and we have to set up our infrastructure such that we can do these segregations, and then we'll determine what makes the most sense, how segregated we want to get. The unfortunate part about it is it's so new that there are hundreds of different suggestions for how to do it, and we want to do the most efficient way. So putting a definite number on it is difficult, but I believe that 350,000 is going to get us in a good place.
Is it going to be an expensive monthly payment, or is this like a one-time cost and we have it for 5-10 years, or is it what's the maintenance like on it?
So from a hardware perspective, you're going to have the upfront setup costs for the hardware, and then as hardware wears out over time, you'll replace it, but it's not something you have to pay for the hardware consistently on a monthly basis. From a software perspective, those are the unknowns. Those are what we're going to look at to find the most cost-effective yet secure provisional software. So there will be some costs there, but what those are, we don't know yet, but we're going to look to make it the most cost-effective that we possibly can.
Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh.
Okay, well, we're about at the end of our time. We are at the end of our time. And, for council, just so you know, this is an opportunity for us to talk and to discuss. The challenge I've had in this particular agenda is that we have so much to cover. And so what we don't want to do is limit discussion time because we really desperately need it. And I will say for myself and for staff, we need your input. We desire your input. And that's why we've added these workshops here so that we can talk and also save some time at council meetings because there's a lot of work going on. That said, let's move to Doug Critchfield. And Doug's going to give us an impact on some things that he's working on, our city impact area and Canyon County Comp Plan. Doug, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor and Council. Good morning. I'll just go briefly over where we are and let you know what's going on with the area of expansion, area of impact expansion that we're looking at. And so, Bree, if you could bring up that first slide. So we've had a future land use map and an area of impact that's been in place for about 17 years. We've attempted to make some changes over the period of time, and we've been negotiating with Caldwell and had some other efforts to move that line, but it hasn't been successful in the past, largely due to a lot of opposition that we received about the area of impact. So, Bree, if you could move to the next slide. And so we've spent the last year just doing kind of an educational campaign of what an area of impact is. And we've met with the community. We've set out over 1,300 notifications to the public and had meetings and met with the county several times about this. And we've also been trying to work with the county on their comprehensive plan, which they're proposing to, that's proposed to be adopted here in May. And trying to propose areas that make sense for Nampa. And so, actually, Bree, if you could go back to that last slide. So the area in pink here is the area that we're proposing. It's about 9,600 acres. The area to the west is largely filling in between us and Caldwell, but to the south is where we've had a lot of difficulty. We brought this to the Planning and Zoning Commission after we had met again several times with the county. And on the day that we brought it to the Planning Commission, the county Development Services Director called us and said, well, we're going to largely support it, but we have some problems with the area of impact. And so we brought it to the Planning and Zoning. They approved or they recommended approval. But we went back and met with the county about what their concerns were. And the county is looking really to minimize the amount of area of impact movement. And they only want us to go about a half mile from the current area of impact line. And then they want to meet with us on an annual basis to move that line. The problem for us in a planning perspective is that it doesn't allow us to plan for the future in terms of utilities and how to service this area. It's very problematic for us. So we're negotiating with the county on what that will mean. This current area of impact is trying to be respectful of what the county is proposing. So Bree, if you could go 2 slides forward. So the county has said that they're interested in preserving agricultural land, which we are too, and we've mentioned that in our comprehensive plan. We're interested in orderly growth of the city, and the area of impact allows us to be able to do that. If property's in the area of impact, it allows us to comment when a subdivision comes in the county that's really kind of a leapfrog type of development. We actively oppose those. We're trying to encourage development near the city borders and annexation into the city to provide those services. In working with the county's indicated that these areas in dark green that are hatched are areas that the county is very interested in preserving as intensive, what they're calling intensive agricultural land. These are contiguous parcels, and they're generally centered around feedlots and dairies with a mile radius around those facilities, and what they're calling prime ag land. And you can see here the red dots, the yellow and the blue dots, these are all the feedlots and the dairies in the south of Nampa. And so the green kind of corresponds with that. However, there's an area kind of to the west of Highway 45 that the county has indicated has prime ag land. It's fairly flat, has good irrigation, that they'd like to preserve as ag land. So Bree, if you go to the next slide. But if you overlay our area of impact that we're proposing, we're staying out of those feedlot areas, but we're proposing to go on either side of 45, simply because it makes sense from being able to the utility side, as well as the providing commercial properties and other residential development that would be a logical movement for the city to the south. We haven't proposed going south of Kuna, Missouri Avenue, again, to work with the county on preserving that prime ag land through that area. So Bree, if you move to the next slide. So you can see the dark green here is where the county's proposing these intensive ag areas, which they're working on a transfer of development right program. Essentially, it's an ag preservation program where they can, developer can come in and they can have a farmer sell their development rights to the developer. And the incentive for that is that the developer then could build closer to the city and city limits, which is a program that would preserve this ag land either in a 20 or 30-year period or in perpetuity, depending on the agreement. So you can see that there's still some conflict going on here. And so what we're looking for from the council is support for us moving forward with the area of impact, the way that we're proposing it, in negotiating with the county. And if there's some type of agreement that we can come up with the county that if, for example, annexation starts to occur in these transfer development right areas, that the county would be able to have some type of review that's more than what they do now. So that's where we are in our negotiation with the county. So I'll take any questions. Yeah.
Council, do you have any questions?
Mayor, just when you say, you were contacted from who, from the county regarding their concerns?
Yes, the Director of Development Services.
And the commissioners are backing him? Or do you know at this point?
So my understanding is that he was asked by a commissioner to.
One commissioner?
Yes, okay. Yeah, it wasn't the whole commission.
Okay.
One of the things that's challenging about where we are right now is that, I'm going to be really blunt and probably say something that somebody won't like, but the county has been their own worst enemy. They have approved subdivision after subdivision in that South Nampa area. If you drive out there, and there are so many subdivisions out there in beautiful ag ground. We're not the one that's perpetuated that at all. One of the reasons why an impact area is, well, I think there's two reasons, and you stated one of them. One reason why an impact area is important is for future planning for infrastructure. As we all know, it takes years to even identify funding. It isn't something that happens overnight. And so when we're planning long-term in infrastructure, you have to know that you have that area. The other challenge that we face is that, and we face this when you look north, and this map doesn't show it, but when you establish an impact area, that is your established impact area. And so another community doesn't come in and start annexing in that area. And it does give us the opportunity to provide feedback. If it's not in an impact area, we don't have a voice. A good example of that was back when we had a subdivision that was that we wanted to have in our impact area, and they refused it. But when it came time to having a problem with the gravel pit next door, and they wanted us to advocate and send a letter, we had no voice to support them because they were not in our impact area. Now, the other piece of an impact area is that when we do write a letter, it's important that they pay attention to it, because the county just approved a subdivision, and I don't like it at all, in our impact area for some homes that is in an immediate area of growth that we're going to be moving through, and they don't require, or they can choose not to require, the same standards we would have. And so when they have a variant, they allow them not to put in a sidewalk. And I think this one's on Midland, if I remember correctly. I forget which that north side. Is it on north side or Midland? I can't remember. Anyway, there's no sidewalk. So we're going to go out and develop and have utilities out there, and they have allowed a small county subdivision with septic tanks and wells to come in right between where we're going to have subdivisions, and there's not going to be a sidewalk on a busy road because they're not requiring it. That is a safety issue. And so an area of impact, it isn't a land grab. There's a very strategic reason why we have an area of impact and why that area of impact is important for us in our long-term planning. So,
yeah, if I may add too, we do have a joint agreement for how the city and the county will interact with each other in the area of impact, and we're proposing that we upgrade that. So and put some more teeth into it so that the city does have a little bit more say as to how those things occur, and that would be part of this negotiation that we're working on.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions?
Just Missouri. So we were proposing further south than that initially, right?
Yes. Yeah, we were proposing.
So this is more or less a compromise to keep out of the dairy.
It is. Yeah.
And so that's how far, I should know, is it a mile between these streets? How far south are we proposing to Missouri? How far is that?
It's 1.5 miles.
1.5 miles. And
Yeah.
they would prefer just a half mile?
Yes.
Then reconsideration on an annual basis? Okay, thanks.
that's the art of the deal in a sense, is they want a half mile, we want a mile and a half, so we'll settle on one. But the question I have as far as we look at further growth to the south, we don't have adequate capacity of our sewer treatment plant to be able to get to that area. So, I mean, we're talking about a major cost associated with developing out that way. To the west, it's more feasible as far as our eventual growth as a city. So that makes total sense to me. And around the lake would be ideal if we could, have planned growth out there, because that's the amenity that a lot of people want to be next to. So I'm less concerned about the growth to the south as I am maybe filling in those areas to the west. But that's just, again, it's a back and forth right now that's taking place. So that's
Mayor, clarification from what Councilman Haverfield said. So what is our capacity for sewer to expand?
we don't have gravity flow from there because of the terrain.
So my question is, maybe it's a Daniel question, is, again, how far do we have gravity flow enough for a pump station or whatever the case is to be able to develop currently?
Mayor, Councilman Brunner, so generally speaking, we can go about down to Lewis with our existing system. It fluctuates in areas just depending on the topography. With the current gravity system. Back in 2008, the master plan that was done then did an analysis of the area south of that and what it would take to serve that area. And it would require either a new treatment facility out near the lake somewhere or a pumping facility to pump that south gravity system back up to the plant.
Okay. So realistically, what our initial request for impact area, we're talking about 40, 50 years before we'd be able to do something, or do we have any projections on that?
If we're talking about the sewer side of things,
yes, that's what I'm talking
if we were to go with a new treatment facility down there, there's probably 10 years of planning involved in that.
Okay.
And that's planning that we would likely not undertake unless it were something that were in the impact area. Just from a standpoint of, if we're going to do that level of planning and do that, we would want some guarantee that there's a likelihood that it would
That we
be
would
approved,
actually-
that we would actually do it.
And I realize Melba is much further south, but I understand they're not even requesting anything north of them as far as further impact area. Is that your understanding also?
I would.
Or you are not even aware?
I don't know.
I don't even know who told me that, but that was quite a while ago, that they just city limits and we don't want to expand. So maybe
Yeah,
that's not
in
true.
in
Totally
talking
false.
with the county about that, they're encouraging all of the smaller communities not to expand at this point, or very far, not to go out very far outside their current area.
All right, thanks.
Doug, did we cover the Canyon County comp plan to the level that you intended? Was there more that you wanted to cover on that?
That's the primary issue, Mayor, is these intensive ag areas and how they're impacting our ability to move the area of impact. The other areas, the movement on the comprehensive plan, we're largely in support of. So.
Okay.
Mayor, just one other question, because I know that when Star and Eagle and Middleton and all that's going on, so if you have a subdivision or whatever in our impact area that is very close to CUNA or whatever the case might be, how easy is it for them, a developer, whatever, to just request, hey, we would like to be in the CUNA rather than Napa?
Yeah, so state law allows annexation from another community into another community's impact area. And there's a proposal on the table now. Rick's just brought some information forward where they're trying to strengthen that position. So that's very possible.
Strengthen in that just a developer's request can make it happen easier? Is that what you mean by strengthen?
Yes, it's just clarifying the language in the code. It's very small language change, but it's clarifying that in the code a little bit.
So there could be more competition, is what I'm hearing.
Yes.
Mayor.
Yes.
Doug, looking at the pink area west of Nampa now, as it goes north, that little cutout, is that Midway Park?
Yes.
Okay, so it's going beyond Smith, or is that Smith on the upper portion of the pink?
Smith is, I'm sorry, I can't see. That's Orchard, yeah,
Okay.
okay, yeah.
And the boundary then is that lake? No, it's not lake, is it lake?
Yes,
Okay.
it's, west of the park is Lake, yeah.
Okay.
So the discussion we touched on briefly earlier regarding the Ustick corridor, the reason why that is so important, and Joe, you have to, because of being a Meridian City Council person, so, but I don't know that it matters. The concern there is that if you're aware that it is Meridian north of Ustick, it is Nampa south of Ustick. Meridian already has the infrastructure in along Ustick. While Mayor Tammy was there, we had a developer actually go and ask if the Meridian would annex in. I really appreciated Mayor Tammy because she said no. And, sometimes it's leadership. It has to do with who's sitting at the table, whether or not they're willing to annex in outside of their area. This is interesting if there's language that is strengthening the opportunity. If we don't have infrastructure there and it is Nampa, then Meridian could annex that in, and it's very likely that a developer would ask to be annexed in because once Highway 16 opens up, they're going to want to get their developments going. And we've got people looking at that ground, but they have to have infrastructure. And my hope is that Meridian wouldn't annex in. Mayor Simison from Meridian and I talked about what to do on the east side of Highway 16. Because Highway 16, where it used to follow the county line on McDermott, now angles and comes over. And so we are planning from an infrastructure standpoint to take water and sewer over to McDermott just north of I-84. But the further north we go, it angles, Highway 16 angles up like this, and there is some developable ground that may be on the east side of Highway 16, the west side of McDermott. So a discussion that we will be having is what are we going to do with the infrastructure, the water and sewer lines in that area? And it could be that Meridian brings the infrastructure to a Highway 16, which is going to be west of McDermott when it gets north, further north. Those discussions are still yet to happen. But on the west side of Highway 16, I think it's imperative that we get infrastructure in. And it goes back to, from a planning standpoint, we have a finite amount of ground. The decisions that we make regarding infrastructure are going to impact the long-term tax base for the city of Nampa. Because these decisions, they're big decisions because of the long-term tax revenue loss. If we don't have infrastructure there, then in perpetuity, there would not be development there if it gets annexed into Meridian.
So Mayor, from what you said, and clarify, please, if, to me then, we're still throwing the dice a little bit. We do infrastructure on the west side.
Of Highway 16.
And, yeah, Highway 16. But still, from what I'm hearing, if the legislature strengthens the developer's ability to decide who they're going to annex with, we could go ahead and, I realize it doesn't happen overnight, but we could have infrastructure out there, and supposedly we could have a developer come in and say, yeah, Nampa, you develop, but we want to go with Meridian, so that would be a potential possibility. That we would spend money and then not get any benefit out of it. I guess that's what
the reason a developer...
I agree with you as far as we need to do it, but it sounds like there still is a gamble.
The reason a developer would do that is because we can't provide the infrastructure. If we have provided the infrastructure, I don't think we're going to have that risk. So I don't...
What I'm looking at too, though, is taxes, property taxes, and so on. So if you have a development, you have residents coming in and they saying, hey, we can pay less through Meridian than we can through, because they are such a wealthy city, then we would just say, hey, sir, Mr. Smith, we want to be part of Meridian, not a part of Nampa. I'm just saying, I'm putting out there some scenarios which...
I think those are going to be those respectful discussions that we will be having amongst, as mayors and as city council members, we'll be having those discussions. And, in the past, it was, and I really appreciated Mayor Tammy, because she actually respected the land use boundary and just said, no, we're not going to do that. We've had those recent discussions with Star, as Star was looking in, and Mayor Chadwick made the decision not to go ahead and move forward in wanting their future land use and to come into ours. And so it's really about having some good discussions and respecting one another as a municipality.
And Mayor, what you said earlier is so important, but it's who in leadership. No leadership changes.
Yeah.
So I have, and not to brown nose you this morning, but I have total confidence that you will be tough enough and whatever, and negotiate in a respectful way, but also but that doesn't mean a mayor 10, 12 years from now would do the same, or a council. So that's why I'm asking these questions.
Candidly, that development, if I were going to guess, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, I think it's going to happen in the next 2 years, because the landowners are already there. Highway 16 coming in, the developers are already ready to move on that ground.
No.
It's going to happen
Quickly,
while we're
10
sitting in
miles.
these seats. Yeah, I think it's going to happen.
Very good.
And Mayor, if it's helpful, we have been involved very heavily with Meridian in planning the 4 square mile area north of U-Stick. And the specific area plan that we're talking about, the Councilmember Havelfield will have some more detail on that when we present that. We're working closely with Meridian on that plan as well. So at least from a planning perspective, and also from your level, that those things there are respectful borders and boundaries.
You know what I really appreciate is that our planning team, the meetings that you're having, thank you for having those relationships. Tom and his peers, they're having these same discussions regarding infrastructure. And so we have some amazing people that are collaborating and working together at the staff level, and I greatly appreciate that. It's a huge value to us. Right. So for legal, would you like to make any comments?
Madam Mayor, just to confirm, it's not going to happen. I'm just telling you, Meridian is committed certainly to the area of impact boundary. It's long-term planning, it's sound municipal growth, and there will be no crossing. That commitment's been made known to the landowners as well, so they understand, don't make the ask, it's not going to happen. There's shared interest in the two cities to be cooperative and supportive of each other, so all 7 of us have consistently expressed that. So.
Thank you for sharing that. That's helpful. Thank you.
And CUNA, we're working with CUNA also in that area.
Yes. Okay, Doug, thank you. Are there any other questions for Doug? Thank you so much. Okay, the next section of our agenda, Rick Hogeboom will be presenting, and the first piece of this is our future city council districts. And you know what, guys, staff, you've done amazing. We've gotten a lot done. If we need to go back and talk more about ARPA funds or something else, it looks like we'll have the time, depending on how long this
I know,
ends.
Rick could extend this a little.
My goal is to give time back.
Yes,
and
This is a
then legal
really
does have a
important-
brief kind of best practices following this on the council liaison piece when we shift over to that. But so there was a House bill passed 2 years ago. I think it was House Bill 413. That established that cities, municipalities that have 100,000 or more people need to adopt districts. Okay? So I think everyone's familiar with that legislation. That affects, based on the current, most recent updated census data, 3 cities. We barely snuck in 100,200 people. So we need to establish districts. The legislation says that 120 days prior to the election, after following the census. So 2023, next year's election, is when we're on the clock now to get districts established by ordinance prior to that election, and the deadline is 120 days prior to that election, which would be like in July. We don't want to wait that long until July. It would be unfair to people who are considering running. In fact, there might be some conflicting. Usually the filing deadline is kind of, that there might be actually potentially filing conflict with if we don't have this up in time for people who need to file, because you're actually filing for a seat when you legally file to run for office, and you need to meet the legal criteria that you're a resident within the district. So our hope is to get the districts established hopefully by the end of this year as we start the new calendar year next year, so that all of you and people in our community can understand, have time to digest and understand what's going to happen by way of districts. So how do we get to establishing districts? The city of Boise hired a consultant that led kind of their establishment of districts. Their last election cycle was already based on districts because the city of Boise was already 100,000 people based on the census from 10 years ago. So when the legislation was passed, there was only one city that it applied to, Boise, with the anticipation that Meridian and Nampa would follow, which is the case based on the new census. Meridian, and Joe can speak to this, the proposed plan here is very similar to Meridian's plan, and actually Boise reached out to me this past week and talked, and they have to redo their zone districts based on the updated census data, and they said that they like what they see and they hear that Meridian and us are contemplating. So kind of the word was already out of what we were kind of considering. So Boise might be adopting something similar to the plan that's established here. They said they would prefer to have some continuity, that all three cities are essentially doing kind of the same thing by way of how to get to the district. So the memo was in your packet. There's two things that need to happen. Legal needs to update ordinance, and they will subsequently update our local ordinance to bring it into conformity with the statute. The goal this morning is to lay before you not a resolution to be approved this morning, but to allow feedback. And so maybe in March, a resolution could be crafted based on your feedback to at least establish a districting committee. Okay, so the districting committee, I'm just gonna really get to the nuts and bolts and skip over a lot of the legalese here, but yes. This wasn't in your packet?
We didn't get it back.
Okay, I'll provide it. So I know I did send it to Nate to include in the packet. So we'll make sure that it gets out to you in an updated packet. So the Nampa Districting Committee membership and qualifications.
Page 26.
So page 26. So you can follow along, and really what the resolution would establish is just that you're going to establish a committee. And my goal, our goal would be over the next month or two to try to get the committee filled with 9 members of the community. And the proposal is to have 9 citizen members on this committee. 6 of those citizen members would come from, and I'll share this map, and I don't want to cause any confusion. You see this map? This is not the proposed council district map, okay? A couple people have asked. This is not, this is simply this is for the sake of establishing 6 members of the committee to ensure geographic diversity, that we just don't have 9 members who all live in one subdivision. That's not in anyone's best interest. We would do our best to recruit, put the word out, and make sure that we get someone that lives in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, okay? And so all parts of the city can say that they are represented by having a citizen at least on the districting committee. We would have an additional 3 members that I put at large, who can live, of course, anywhere within the city. And so we would have 9 members on the districting committee. I would be sort of the facilitator to lead into the first meeting, and they would have an organizational meeting where they would establish a chair and a vice chair. There would be 3 ex officio members on this committee, non-voting members. One would be Daniel Badger, or an assigned designee. And Daniel and the GIS team would be crucial in bringing in information based on population counts within our precincts. And Rodney Ashby and a designee for our planning team would also be represented as supporting staff to basically serve the 9 to assist them with the information they need in order to make sure that we get good districts. The 3rd ex officio member would be our Canyon County Clerk, Chris Yamamoto. Had a good meeting with him last week, and as well as our election supervisor. They are still finalizing. They're getting close to finalizing their updated precinct maps. So they will have to do some changes to the precincts based on the most recent census count. One thing that the legislation guides us in is to not cut precincts in half. We have to keep precincts intact. So basically, it's going to be a math game, a puzzle game of making sure that we have 6 districts where precincts are all contiguous. It doesn't give us a specific in the legislation. It just says as close as possible in population count. So it doesn't give us boundaries as far as what the variance can be on population. It just says as close as possible.
Mayor, quick question, I mean, since you mentioned the county. So the elections are up for 2 county commissioners, is my understanding, right?
Yeah, that's my understanding.
And in primaries. So are those being re-evaluated too? And if
They,
they are, I would think
the
that
county
that
did
would have to be
update
done
their
yet.
zones for county
They are
commissioners.
already
My understanding is
set?
last week they did update the zones, and there was some slight changes to Zone 2, which Nampa lives in. And I would refer to the county to provide that map, and I don't have their.
I
new
looked for it the other
commissioners on
day and
that.
didn't find it, so that's why.
Yeah, I would write them and.
I'm
reference
not
that.
Natalie where I can find all these things.
So this committee, so they're going to update their precinct maps probably over the next, soon. And if you approve a resolution, say, not in the council meeting on the 22nd, but the following one in March, then we can start doing the legwork of recruiting and trying to get the 9 citizen members. The hope is to convene sometime maybe in May. It's kind of a good target as the first organizational meeting. But leading up to that meeting in May, we'll already have the precincts, we'll already have the population counts. The team can do some math with making sure precincts are contiguous and helping guide the 9 citizens, because the 9 citizens will be constrained. They just don't get to do what they want. They have to make sure that the math adds up, that we're consistent. We can take into account a little bit where Rodney is going to be helpful is to know that there have been subdivisions built since the census was taken. We're not supposed to count those people by way of establishing the districts because you're supposed to go off the census data, which only gets updated once every 10 years. Of course, we know growth happens over 10 years. Some districts will be landlocked, which means not have a lot of growth. There's some districts, of course, whatever districts are in the north and the southwest have already experienced some subdivision growth and will continue to experience some subdivision growth. So we'll look at making sure that if there are any variances, that they're slight, but that we're not over-representing districts that are growing because they'll continue to grow.
Rick, can I
Yeah.
ask a quick question? So who determines who those 9 people, the people are?
Yeah, you would appoint the nine people for council
And then do
approval.
they get, okay, so I appoint
So the
them
resolution
and
would establish
council-
this ad hoc committee.
And council approves?
Yes, you
Okay,
would-
so it's
you
a
would bring-
collaborative effort to identify
Yep.
who those people are to
Yeah.
fill those positions.
Yeah, so we would put the word out with like a deadline, kind of like we do with boards and commissions, and try to get people in and make sure that they live. We'll do verification. We'll make sure we get 6 that live in the 6, 3 at large who live anywhere within city limits. Only Nampa city residents would be on this, not non-Nampa residents. You would approve that. My hope is to bring, probably in a council meeting, maybe in April or May, a lump sum, here are the 9 for appointment, and then once they're appointed, then we can then plan an organizational meeting once they're seated. This would be an ad hoc committee. They have a very specific mission, and once that mission's fulfilled, they're done. They're done with their work.
So Mayor, if I may, and I'm not advocating this, is there any criteria, Vita information or whatever that we would want to put out there before people apply, what the expectation would be as far as any background or time lived in Nampa, or I mean, is there criteria, I guess is my bottom line question.
We can follow up and discuss that. My preference would be to just make sure that they're city residents that live within. If you have additional guidance on maybe a preference for someone, of course, who's lived here longer than,
So
say,
you're not
someone else.
looking for different job entities or whatever, employment folks, or whether expertise, whether.
I'll say yes and no.
Health, education, you know what I'm talking about.
Functionally, yes. By way of resolution, that specificity, I think the aim is to make sure we have a diverse people from across the socioeconomic strata, the geographic strata. We have some ethnic diversity within our community as well. And we want to make sure that the 9 citizens, that the whole city can look at them and see that we have people that live in all parts of the city who come from all walks of life and who reflect what our city looks
Okay,
like.
Mayor, and we did one follow-up. Then the application happens, say you have 4 individuals in Sector 1.
Yeah.
So who is the interview committee, or how is that actually, where then actually those folks are suggested for that sector and goes before?
So that specifics aren't
Before-
contemplated in the
before mayor and the
resolution. If you want that guidance, it'd be again similar to the board and commission where the ordinance, all it really requires is that the mayor appoints and you confirm. As far as the logistical details getting there.
Our process is that I would probably have 2 council members on the interview committee.
That's what I'm getting
And
at.
maybe alternate the council members, so it isn't the same 2 council members on each district, right? So each area, so like Zone 2 may have 2 council members, Zone 5 may have a different 2. So all council members could participate, and then we would identify a few others to join that are not interested in serving that would serve on that interview committee. Because typically we have an interview committee, and then like for commissions, you have some current commissioners that are on there, but in this, I think we would do something like that.
So
Go ahead.
the timeline, it doesn't happen overnight. You'd need a few weeks to.
A couple
Get that
months.
process.
I think once the resolution's up, my preference would be not to like codify that in the resolution, but just let there be an understanding, a good faith understanding that, just like we do with boards and commissions, that we will follow by practice what the mayor suggested, if it meets with your agreement, to do interviews of applicants and maybe have some support staff, possibly Daniel and Rodney as well, who are going to be ex officio members as part of
And
that.
actually, I probably would defer to legal too, in what goes in the resolution versus what criteria we're putting in the interview process. And then, do you know, as Meridian, do you have council members on the interview committee, or how are you guys managing that?
Madam Mayor, it's a little less formal. And the reason being is the lion's share of the work is just a math equation, equal protection clause, distributing the population equally among 6 districts, which is more of a planning mapping role. And then the committee's focus is more providing that awareness of different regions of the community and helping facilitate the discussion, should we encourage this park area to be part of a district, or have a roadway be a line and a boundary instead of a park, because I live there and I kind of understand there's a connection here, or bringing more of that boots on the ground feel to any minor adjustments to what the math equation's already created. So we don't yet have council members on any interview committee. It's more trying to find folks that just represent a region.
Thank you. I appreciate hearing that. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think it provides some flexibility. Actually, in the first draft that I saw with Meridian, it wasn't even going to be, I think council confirmed, the mayor was just going to identify a committee. And I think what was contemplated initially was that the mayor would be given the flexibility to just kind of form the committee and get going. Is that correct?
Just to comment on that, some of the discussion has been trying to keep the council members out of it whenever possible.
Yeah.
So we've been focused on not wanting to be part of a committee, just to create any impression or perception that council has an interest in where lines are. Because again, the goal of everybody is merely equal protection compliance, and the lines are where they are.
I appreciate you sharing that, because it just popped into my head that if council's involved, I think it really does become a conflict of interest, because there could be pressure to approve someone in your area to ensure that, right? And so I think there could be a perception
Unless the
issue.
council person was, totally dealing with applicants from a whole different area or whatever.
Right, or they're not going to run, but, right, there could be that perception. So that's interesting. Okay.
Yeah, and that is a legitimate concern in the legislation, is that it specifically calls out that we don't do shoestring districts and whatnot, that if it looks like you're trying to protect incumbents with the way the districts are formed, and a citizen were to file a grievance against us, and we're able to sustain that. I don't know what the legal liability would be, but the state does at least articulate what the intent is that isn't done. I guess they would have to prove that that's what we were trying to do with the maps, but I think the citizen committee with the separation is to ensure that what they tee up to you, and I'll just kind of skip to the end product in the process, is that there will be 2 public, I should say, open houses that I put in here in the ordinance, or not, in the resolution, that the districting committee, the hope is that they would get down to one map or 2 or 3 maps that they solicit public input from with 2 open houses, get input, and then they reconvene. And then what they're handing over to you is a recommendation on one map. And basically what the resolution puts you as a council in is it's a thumbs up or thumbs down on it. It's not to replay with the lines and basically nullify their work by just doing whatever you want and redoing things as a council. It's to adopt the map. Does the map meet the statutory criteria or not? If you feel that it fails to do so, you can remand it back to the committee, but you would have to provide very clear reasons on why it fails based on statutory guidelines, not based on just preference. It has to meet statutory burden. Then you would have a public hearing as council, and you would adopt formally at that point through resolution, ordinance, what the map is. And then once it's established, it gets filed with the county clerk, they'll recognize that this is the legitimate election map that the city of Nampa is going to recognize, and then prepare the elections. So
That was just a time because it's almost 10 till, although that clock is 3 minutes fast. So sorry.
yeah, no, this one was the longer one,
Okay.
by the way. So that covers what the intent is, kind of the nuts and bolts. Do you have any feedback or questions on the process?
Mayor?
Yes?
So it's a given that there will be 6 separate districts, 6, and council members from each of those districts. It won't be
Correct.
4 and 2 at large. It's
Nope.
going to be 6.
It's going to be 6.
And do we only vote in the district that we're,
Correct. Yeah, the legislation is clear that the only qualified people to vote are the qualified electors within those districts. So that will be a change for the city. What it means moving forward is council members, you're not going to have to campaign through the whole city. You're only going to have to campaign in your district. But in 2023, only half the city is going to vote. And
Oh, from there on out, there'd be just half the.
every 3 years, only half the city's voting, and you're voting basically in threes because 3 districts will be up every 2 years. So when the maps are established, and what I avoided were some hypothetical scenarios. I'll save that for another time based on time. But just one quick hypothetical: Councilman Rodriguez just got reelected. If the maps in 2023 show that zones 2, 4, and 6 are up, let's say you happen to live in zone 4 and you're looking at this new map in 2023. From the people that I've talked to, socialized, is let's say Councilman Rodriguez, he can run in 2 years for seat 4 and establish a 4-year seat in the zone that he actually lives in. You can choose not to run and finish out your at-large terms. Everyone right now you're in the final at-large term ever in the history of Nampa. And then once your terms are finished, all future elections for each of these seats, you have to live in the zone. But it's going to be a little confusing because in 2023, then 2026, it's possible some of you might be in seat 6, but you find out you live in seat 4, and you have to make a decision. Do I run then, or do I just finish out my 4-year term? You can run and lose hypothetically, and still get to finish out the remaining 2 years on your term, if that makes sense. So there's a lot of hypothetical scenarios, and that's just one example, just for practical things. So
Mayor, I realize this is not going to change. This has been established, but to me, it really de-incentivizes people to vote when you only have half the population, and there's going to be other things on the ballot too that you just are not going to have citizens that are going to just make a bit of sense to me. But that's just my comment.
The activists who pushed for this reached out to me. I'll just leave her name out. Who really lobbied Senator Winder, who really kind of carried this forward. Her intent. The other side of that is that your vote is worth 6 times the impact now. So what she felt is what it will do is it'll empower people, that it won't be diluted. You're not one of 100,000. You'll be one of 18,000.
No, I understand that. I'm talking
and
about
that you'll have more leverage over your local council member. And when you write and you have a localized concern, you're writing your local person holding their feet to the fire. So, that's their intent, is to see that you are more responsive to your constituents in a local geographic area who claim you as theirs. And so that's their intent. So if you're generally okay, I will not make any amendments to this, but feel free to reach out offline if you have any concerns or further questions. But for the most part, this would just be the resolution establishing a committee and bringing it forward in March, so.
Thank you.
And be putting your feet to the fire.
You talking about him?
Both of you.
Oh, we live about half a
Big
block
plan.
away.
I think currently where it is, there's three or four of us in the same. Yeah.
All right, well, I'm gonna transition and this is, the next one is on board and commissions liaison assignments. But as I pull that up, Joe, is it good if I tag you to give kind of a, I think, a brief best practices? And this was to guide, this was gonna be part of our workshop a couple months ago and we didn't quite get to it. So Joe's gonna kind of do a quick guidance on that, and then I will bring up the spreadsheet after
Okay.
your presentation.
It's intentionally short because the direction from the legal perspective on the role is some very clear, simple rules, and it's how to be effective. The whole purpose of being a liaison is to be an effective bridge of communication between the commission or committee that you're a liaison with and the council as a whole. And the primary function of a liaison, the reason that it exists is for communication, to keep council members aware of what that committee's doing. And that is primarily it. And one of the areas that we always encourage any liaison to resist the temptation is to get in the weeds. Council members always have city's best interest and desire to help and desire to provide direction. But what can be challenging is a particular commission will be very reluctant if a council member says, you should do this and this and this. Commission members will not speak up, and it's just a matter of courtesy and practice. They're not going to say, stay in your lane, that's not your purview. It puts commissions in a very difficult spot when a council member gets in the weeds and tries to provide direction, even if it's sound direction or it's meant with good intention. So resist the temptation to provide that. You might get asked for your individual thoughts on something that they're doing, which is fine. But leading and directing, assigning tasks, avoid the temptation to do so. If you ever think that there's something that a commission should be doing or shouldn't be doing, the general best practice is bring it up to the mayor and say, I'm a liaison to this commission and they're not doing X or they should be doing Y. I'd like to have them maybe look into that. That's some very productive liaison work to do it that way. By going that route, you avoid putting any commission member in a difficult spot who's not going to tell you no, or, and from the legal perspective, there's some times where you could step outside the bounds of what's legally permissible if you start directing tasks that you don't have the authority to direct and you're having commissions do things. Another, in the last area to avoid for those commissions where there's land use issues, because you're all judges, in that quasi-judicial role, if it's P&Z, for example, you might know things or want to discuss things that are part of an existing application with the city. That's an absolute no-no at any time. Never broach, never ask. Anyone asks you, you never discuss any, you just can't. It's just part of not only the legal requirement to stay away from any and all land use discussions once an application's been filed, but by avoiding it without exception, you preserve the public trust to ensure that nothing ever gets discussed, for better or for worse, outside of the noticed public hearing. So again, if there's ever questions about anything, when in doubt, you can always call legal and say, I don't know, this is kind of weird. I'd like to raise this issue. How should I do it? Or the mayor. Certainly the mayor's office, the area to ask that question to avoid any problems.
So when we get emails, at best just not reply to it at all?
It depends.
Let's repeat that question, because
Yeah, so the question is, if you get an email from a commission, perhaps, asking you something or asking you to provide some direction, I think that's a great example to contact the mayor's office and just see. You don't want to, you're not being rude, and all this information gets shared with all the commissions as well. So they understand that if you're not engaging in directing, you're not being rude, you're just trying not to cross responsibilities. So they know that you have a particular role and you're not there to direct on behalf of the city their tasks. So they shouldn't be, emailing that type of question. But when in doubt, ask, absolutely.
So for
That was a
clarity,
good question, Councilman Bauer. Thank you for asking.
so for clarity, are you talking about not staff, but commissioners that are non-staff? Because we'll get conversation or communication from staff members individually.
Sure.
On things that, they ask for our input or give us guidance as far as on what's going on. So that type of communication is acceptable. I think what you're asking for is the other commission members that are non-staff.
Right. Yeah, commission members.
Thank you. This has been helpful.
You bet.
One thing that we haven't been doing that I would like to begin is that and I just want to make sure that I communicate accurately here, but one of the primary roles of a council member is serving as a liaison, but also reporting back to the other council members who are not engaged. And so the way that council members know what the various commissions are doing is to have a report out. And so I would like to add a report out, and maybe we could report out at a council meeting or
In these meetings?
or this meeting at a workshop, so it doesn't lengthen. So maybe what we do is at each workshop, we have 2 or 3 brief report outs, and the next workshop, we have the next 2 or 3, depending on, to where annually, we're getting a report out at least twice on every commission. Would you guys be open to that? Because to have you come back and say, you know what, I am liaison, let's say, to the whatever, and this is what they're working on, because that's the whole reason we have them, is for the report out.
Mayor, from my perspective, what I've been doing is just like with planning and zoning. I'll just go in and I'll state, just like we did this last one, that I'm giving an update of what took place at our February 7th City Council meeting. These are the items that we discussed, and just hit the highlights, not go all the way through it. And then I'm open for questions. This last time there was just one question, and that was, what was the % of rate increase for our irrigation? That was the only feedback that I got. Otherwise, it's just information given, thanked for, and then I'm gone. So, that's the way that I've handled my commission involvement at the airport level. Again, there's less of that. It's just more you're sitting there and you're a part of the process, Natalie, as far as in listening what's going on. There might be a question directed towards you, but you try to avoid, like he's saying, any feedback that might be compromising your position on something. But again, it's more informative. At the NDC level, we've had a lot more involvement with, cost-related issues and direction given. The crossover, like, we talked about yesterday with this MOU that's coming forward, so that, there's more communication process. That's a different animal in itself, but so anyway, I guess as a liaison, it's, again, I think it's what he's saying, that you're just more there to help give information as what's happened, not give your personal opinion on what is, has happened, but and then going forward, try not to volunteer anything.
What about advocacy on behalf of the commission? Advocating on behalf of that commission, a position or an initiative or whatever. What would be the role of a city council member related to that?
Madam Mayor, that's fine, because it's ultimately, right, if a commission's making a recommendation that the city take a particular action, if the liaison was at the committee meeting and heard the discussion and saw how the decision was made, certainly they could be a very good advocate. The recommendation's the same, because that's the key. It's the commission's work, the commission's decision or recommendation that's being brought forward to you. So the council member liaison can say, I was there, I understand how they got to this recommendation, here's what they recommend. That's certainly appropriate.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
So in 2 minutes, and this part, should be relatively quick because everything's relatively the same, but this spreadsheet, which should be in your packet, shows kind of what the liaisons were 2021 and then 2023. We could do an annual cycle. I suggested kind of the 2-year cycle because you elect your council president every 2 years. And I think what would be good is, because once you're elected, there's no election until 2023, if that makes sense, to kind of lock in 2-year cycles, kind of what the assignments are. Just a suggestion. So we're not doing this every year, but every 2 years. The only liaison that's required by state law is the library board. And it's I know it's in small font there, but it says that each year, and so maybe we have to do it each year and through by resolution. Each year, the council shall appoint one of its members to be a liaison to the board without voting rights, end quote. So I'm just quoting that reference. So as a housekeeping issue, Councilwoman Levi's done a great job on the library board, and the suggestion would be for her to continue. So I'm not suggesting a motion or making a motion. I'm not a council member, but what we could tee up maybe in the next council meeting is a resolution to formalize this because it's statutorily required. All of the others have been more kind of sort of de facto understanding of who's showing up. All of these meetings are public meetings, so anybody from the public can attend. There's no law prohibiting you from attending, but it's good practice to know that not more than 2 of you are showing up at one, and it's good practice to have an understood liaison who's kind of assuming the responsibility to provide the situational awareness and context when we do the reports to help sort of provide context. So Haverfield Planning and Zoning, the suggestion would be to continue with that. Are you okay with, Mayor, just quickly running down the list? Development impact fee, Haverfield. NDC, what's kind of unique about this is clearly this is a statutorily recognized board, but we don't require a liaison because what we have is actually 2 council members on the NDC itself. In this case, Councilman Brunner and Haverfield. Brunner's term expires this year. Our ordinance requires that there's 2 council members who make up that we have 2 that are on the total NDC, and I know Councilman Brunner would be honored to serve again on the NDC. Brings a lot of institutional knowledge, but at that time, later in the summer, that would have to be an action that council would have to take. Airport, as Councilman Haverfield mentioned, Councilwoman Jangula indicated interest in the airport, and you're aware of the logistics that it's once a month, second Monday, 5:30, and they meet at MAF. So I provided all the logistical information in here. Arts Historic Preservation, this is a little bit unique because Haverfield is on the Arts and Historic Preservation as a board member, and Councilwoman Levi is a liaison to the Arts and Historic Preservation Committee. Bike Ped, Levi. Board of Appraisers was vacant. We've never had a liaison, and the suggestion is to kind of keep that, again, to maintain sort of the independence of the Board of Appraisers. What they're doing is making a recommendation on fees for you to act on, and I think the separation is cleaner that way than to have a council member saying, don't do this, I'm not going to vote for this, don't approve this, or kind of, sort of leveraging within the committee to create intimidation. So I want them to be kind of open and free to be able to recommend to you what they do. Same with Building and Fire Code Advisory Appeals Board. There's actually a legal kind of separation of jurisdictions on that I think, again, it's cleaner that there isn't a council liaison on that because they hear appeals and other things. Building Site Design Standards. We could have a liaison, but again, they're kind of a jurisdictional appeal board as well, that they're part of the workflow process of things that go on, and I like the separation. Council does certain things, Building Site Design does certain things, and some things, in some senses, it's cleaner. But if someone wants to attend those meetings and sit in and for informational purposes, you can let me know if you want that. But no one identified that as being something that they're jumping up for. Golf, Rodriguez, he's an avid golfer, so it works well. Venue management, we meet this afternoon, Rodriguez. And then the working groups, liaisons are not required.
Rick?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I was going to ask if, Natalie, if you wanted to do that one. If not, I'll keep it. Or if somebody else wants event management. Okay, I'll take it.
It's a little bit of a logistical challenge because of the time we meet in the day, and so it's Thursdays at 4. And actually, I need to update that. We meet at 3:30 now, so I'm going to update this sheet. So
And
it's
Councilman
3:30
Bauer,
to 4:30.
do you have an interest, because I know because of work, it used to be maybe not possible, but if,
And we meet at the Fort Idaho Center office, so it's a little bit of a commute there too. and back.
I was off Thursday afternoon, but now I'm off the mornings and I'm working the afternoon.
Oh, there you go. So we'll, Unless
almost
someone else
5
would like
after,
that.
so,
Yeah.
yeah, we'll go ahead.
The working groups, to be clear, these are the wastewater design review, Crow Management's an internal kind of working group, Healthy Impact, NAMPA. I think there's more on that later. I know, Mayor, you've indicated interest in sort of reviving and formalizing that work. And I know Councilwoman Jangula, you indicated interest in that. We would keep you apprised of proceedings on this regard. But right now, there aren't like scheduled regular meetings of Healthy Impact. So you're not missing anything. Mayor's Teen Council's, again, an internal thing. Councilwoman Jangula, you indicated interest in that. And I'll keep you apprised of ways to maybe engage Mayor's Teen Council when there's opportunities that arise. The sister city, Rodriguez, the Tree Forestry Board, which Haverfield and Rodriguez already indicated interest when Adam Mancini put out an email like a year ago. And that's working well. Adam's had good feedback, and he's happy to have 2 council members interested in following the proceedings of Tree and arborist work. So the external entities, VRT is Levi, Compass is Rodriguez, Council on Aging. To be clear, Council on Aging is an external, they're their own separate legal entity. The mayor does not appoint their board commission members. Their only connection they have to the city is that they use the Napa Rec Center, and from my understanding, there's a standing understanding that when the rec center was built, that there would be space dedicated to the work of the senior center work. So that's the relationship that the city has by way of providing that resource, but the mayor does not appoint members there. But Levi has been attending those meetings and has been an advocate for their work representing the council, and you wish to continue that from my understanding. Nampa Housing Authority right now, and just closing with this, talked with Andy Rodriguez, and there have been meetings with the mayor and our legal, and Andy and their legal. They've gotten to a point where they don't take federal money anymore. They're like their independent entity. What's interesting is the only way they could form in the first place back in 1937 or 1939 was that there was a resolution. It's not even an ordinance. It was just a resolution that the mayor made back then to say that recognizes the need to have a Nampa Housing Authority. And that provided the statutory covering for them to exist as a state-defined entity. But they are currently reevaluating whether or not they can fully separate from sort of the umbrella of that statutory definition. So right now, because they're sort of, this is good. This isn't a bad news, like they're in a state of flux. This is a very good development. They're financially sound, strong. They're able to then exercise more discretion and preference in how they administer their funds without all the federal strings attached. And so they're reevaluating whether or not, just to be candid, whether the mayor should continue. Our practice has been the mayor appoints their board members. We've continued to do that. But we're reevaluating all of that, and we've had meetings with them, and we're continuing to engage them to see where they kind of land and final. But Councilwoman Levi has been their liaison, and I just kind of put a to be determined now pending their potential reorganization, which I'll update you when there's clarity on that. So I know we're six after, so I'll end it there. I don't know, Mayor, if you want to just understood.
Just a really quick comment on Compass. If we're, as a board member on Compass, and I'm not positive on VRT, but if we're unable to attend, we need to appoint
Alternate.
our secondary person. And so that notification, it has to be done 24 hours in advance if it's, I don't remember how that all works, but anyway, there are some guidelines. So if ever someone cannot attend, if you could just let us know in advance, and then we'll work with the board. It's just a reminder, because I'm not sure if I'll be at the next one, and I was just recently reminded, so I thought I would let everybody know.
Yeah, and Rick, as far as the Compass Board, we do have alternates, Rick and Tom, and who was the other one? Jeff? Yeah.
Jeff is an alternate. Tom is actually on the board,
Yeah,
yes.
right, okay, right. And then I just was assigned, kind of cool, to the Finance Committee of
Yes.
of Compass.
Yes.
I was going to ask somebody who wanted Compass, and I went, nah, never mind.
Yeah.
I was going to give it to Natalie.
That's one that is actually voted on
Yes.
at a council meeting,
Yes.
and it needs to be for the duration of the term.
That's correct.
So, yeah.
So that segues just to a logistical, to close this out, Mayor, do you want to formalize the will of mayor and council? You know, sort of the de facto understood assignments that don't require a formal action. Is the preference to formalize that through an action item?
I'd like to look to legal. I don't know that we need to. Not required, and I don't know that, in some ways, I would rather not get, there are certain ones that have to be, and then
The
what it does
library.
is it can, well, and Compass and VRT have to be. I think it confuses it if we start formalizing the ones that don't have to be, and then you forget which ones do and don't. So I'd like to stay true to what is formalized, and everybody's put their input in. If you would like to join, there's nothing wrong with having a second council member participate on Ed Commission if someone has an interest and wants to. So just stay in really close communication with Rick. If you're okay with that, I would say let's not formalize this with a vote.
Are you done, Rick?
Yeah.
I have a 30-second question, if I may. Mayor.
Yes.
And it's back to district team, using Victor as an example.
Yeah.
So when the districts are established,
Mhm.
and he happens to be not in the district, you said he has an at-large. But if he decides not 2 years from now to run in the district that he actually resides, then he would have to step down then in 25.
Yeah, in 25, he would have to run for reelection based on, so in 2023, seats 2, 4, and 6 are up next year.
He would have to step away from this seat, but then he could run for another seat in 25.
He could if yeah. Another hypothetical scenario is in next year, he might live in 2, 4, or 6, or vice versa, and you might get a grouping of candidates running for those seats. Correct. He would expire, and then he wouldn't be able. He couldn't run for anything. He would have to wait 2 years after that and run against
I'll be 76
the incumbent.
Okay. So I would stand for a motion to adjourn from this meeting. It's been